Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm of course your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 273rd episode, our guest is Ericka Verba. Ericka Verba is Director and Professor of Latin American Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. Her research interests include the cultural Cold War, the role of music in social movements, and the intersection of gender and class politics in Latin America. She is also an accomplished musician and was a founding member of the LA-based new song groups Sabiá and Desborde. Her new book, Thanks to Life, a biography of Violeta Parra, was published January 14th by the University of North Carolina Press. And now on to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So you're in Los Angeles right now, is that right?
I am, yes.
Have you been affected by the fires?
Everyone in we were close to evacuate. We were all packed, but everyone knows. I mean, I know many people who lost their homes, including we just did a book launch with 9 musicians, and 2 of them, their house burned down.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah. So they texted me on Tuesday saying, we're being evacuated. Don't worry. We have the instruments we're using in the concert. And none of us thought that, 5 hours later, they had no home left. And lots of other instruments in the house that burned. So.
Oh, wow.
It's really sad. Yeah. I mean, it's been so. And for the rest of us, life goes on. So it's very strange. It's
right.
A very strange, because it's going to take years for it's just a lot of loss.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I know. I saw that it was going to rain a couple days ago, and then they were like, but now we're worried about mudslides. And it's like, what? I know it's break around here.
No, it's very strange because I'm now on the alert system, after all of that, because we were very close to the fire. We were packed. And now it's like they're talking about flash floods, and I'm not usually a person that gets very, alarmed very easily, but with this kind of app, I'm like, oh, I should be alarmed. But I'm sure we'll be fine. Yeah, where are you? I'm sorry, I didn't catch.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you got the cold this winter, huh?
It is. I believe there's an ice storm outside right now. So.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, yeah. It is what it is, I guess. So.
Absolutely.
Anyway, it is lovely to talk to you across the distance
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you here tonight. But for people who don't know who you are, if you might go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Certainly. My name is Ericka Verba, and I'm a professor of Latin American Studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles. And I'm also director of the program. And I just finished writing a biography of the Chilean artist Violeta Parra, which I'm very excited to be able to talk about with you tonight.
So I wasn't familiar with her work before I started reading your book. But how did you decide to work on this project? What was the draw for you?
Well, it really goes, this is like my life project, I am not embarrassed to say. And it really goes back to my high school years. I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston. It was pretty dull, I would say. And when I was a teenager, so when I was in high school, a family moved there from Chile. And as far as I was concerned, they were the most exciting thing in my town. The father was studying radical pedagogy. That's why he was able to leave the country with this grant. And the mother was an actress, and she was she was doing plays by Bertolt Brecht and all this experimental theater, and she was getting the lead parts. And then the kids who were my age, they played music, they were artists. And in particular, Miguel, who was my age, he was in my grade. I guess he had a real influence on me because he was so angry. He was teenagers can be angry anyway, but he was really angry because he had been uprooted from his home country in Chile, and Chile had had a military coup, September 11th of 1973, the other September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
And his country was being torn apart by the military. The military was burning books. It was burning, destroying records. It was disappearing people, which is when you don't they take you away in the middle of the night and their family never knows what happened to you. And just really horrendous repression. And because of sort of Cold War policies, our military government our not our military government, our
Yeah,
government
well, I
funded
mean,
the military. Yeah. And so through the CIA, and there was this anger, and also part of the anger was that we in the high school, this US high school, we had no idea. Like we knew there was a war in Vietnam, but we had no idea there was a coup in Chile. None of us did.
mhm,
And so I had this kind of political awakening, and a tremendous sense of responsibility, to be honest with you, along with this incredible musical awakening, because the music that they were playing, that was sort of part of the Chilean resistance, was just so powerful. And Violeta Parra's songs were part of that repertoire, right? So from
mhm,
literally, I can say from age 14 on, her music has been accompanying me, and sort of this love of music, and sort of also my political awakening and sense of responsibility, I would say, guided my sort of my pathway. I ended up majoring in Latin American studies. I'm now the director of Latin American studies at Cal State LA. I ended up being a musician playing this kind of music, this Latin American new song. I put on a concert of Violeta Parra songs, and now I've written a biography of her. So it's kind of a very I looking back, I can see the thread. You know, when you're bumbling along in life, you don't really see it. But now that I've had this culminating project, I can say, oh, I've really been working on this a long time.
mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But for people that don't know who she is, I mean, there's so much to say. There's a whole book's worth to say, obviously, but like, what would people need to know about her? And you mentioned a little bit how she was important politically, but what are kind of some of the reasons that she's culturally significant?
Yes, well, I'm so glad you asked that, because what I asked the first page of the book says, note to reader, put this book down and go and listen to her music, and go and look at her art, because she's really a creative genius, and that's why I wrote this biography. And I think I do want to recognize that she's very well known in Latin America.
Mhm,
People know her songs. I don't know if they know her visual art quite as much, but they do know her songs. She's a recognized, genius of the 20th century. So one of the my goals in this book was sort of to introduce her to a wider audience, which is why I'm so grateful to be on this podcast. So she's really a multifaceted artist. She composed songs. So the song "Gracias a la Vida," Thanks to Life, which is
mhm,
what gives my book its title, Thanks to Life, is probably her most well-known song. It's been recorded by hundreds of artists, literally. Uh, Joan Baez recorded it. And actually named her album Gracias a la Vida. But so has Casey Musgrave. I guess she's country.
mhm,
Um, Yo-Yo Ma did an instrumental version on a CD he put out during COVID that was to help us, to feel soothed. And also, all sorts of Latin American artists have recorded her. Mercedes Sosa, Elis Regina. I can go on and on. And Placido Domingo did as well. So she's really, that song is recognized as sort of a beautiful anthem to
mhm,
life. Uh, and she wrote hundreds of other songs, and they're still being sung throughout Latin America. But she was also a visual artist, which is really remarkable, I think, to be so multi-talented. And
mhm,
so she made oil paintings, she made sculptures, and she made these vast tapestries on burlap with scraps of yarn. And she ended up being the first Latin American artist to have a solo show in the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris, which is
mhm,
actually housed in a wing of the Louvre Museum, the Louvre Palace. So she always just said she had a show in the Louvre, and we all just it's you can't argue with her. She did have a show in the Louvre Palace. So there you go. Uh,
mhm,
First Latin American to do so. So she really was. And she composed also these atonal, very modern sounding pieces for guitar, that are just also very, very inventive and very moving, and even more remarkable in the sense that she never studied music. She didn't know how to read or write music, and yet there's these beautiful compositions that classical composers in Chile sort of recognize as perhaps among the best compositions ever coming out of Chile. So again, truly a creative genius. And then her life story is very interesting, because you couldn't possibly predict she would create all of this or have all of this recognition. She comes from a large family of 10 in the south of Chile, a provincial city, town, even, I think it's better to say, and, made her way to the city, the capital of Santiago, and, you know, made a living singing in bars and then started collecting folk songs. I mean, she had a very interesting life and a very I would say that she battled in life. She had to fight for pretty much everything that she was able to achieve.
Right. And her family is also pretty prolific in terms of artists, and
Yes.
she comes kind of from a long line of various artists. So
Well, it's
you know.
truly remarkable. We call it the Parra clan. So Parra. So her older brother Nicanor Parra, who really had an influence on her, he's a world-renowned poet. His the book that kind of made him an internationally renowned poet was called Antipoemas, so anti-poems. But he lived to 104, so
Hmm.
he really was very productive, and he's won the Cervantes Prize, which is, after the Spanish language equivalent to the Nobel Prize. It's the highest achievement you can have as a poet in the Spanish language, and he's that. And then one of her brothers, Roberto Parra, wrote this wonderful play in verse that ended up touring the world, and thousands of people have seen it. It's called La Negra Esther. Um, and then also her other brother, Laulo Parra, was like a rock idol when he was older. Well, the rock group Los Tres from Chile, they ended up kind of adopting him. So they're if you know rock en español, Spanish language rock, everybody knows Lalo Parra because he was the Tio Lalo. Everyone, he was the Uncle Lalo. So and that's only 4 out of 10. I mean, I could keep
Right.
going. They were the
Sure.
more well-known of the siblings.
Right. Um,
Oh, and the children are all very famous. So
right.
the
Yeah,
grandchildren,
exactly.
it goes on and on. Yeah.
Definitely. But you've kind of mentioned how popular and influential she's been in South America and all over the world. And obviously you're not the first person to tell her story. And so how do you get something, this is something I always am interested in, biographers especially. This is such a well-worn subject at this point. How do you get something new or shed new light on something a story that's been told so many times by so many different people?
Well, that's interesting because she's well known, but she hasn't been biographied, whatever the verb would be, that much.
I
She's
like that word,
Yeah,
biographied.
we'll wait it up otherwise. So in Chile, there are like three biographies of her.
Okay.
Two are pretty slim. They were done about 20 years. I mean, they're pretty slim. They're very at the centennial of her birth, which was 2017. Victor Herrero, who's a wonderful writer and journalist from Chile, who had a research team, did an excellent biography of her, called Después de vivir un siglo, which is a line from her song that says "After living a century." But what's interesting about that biography is he's in conversation. It's very, she's very Chilean, right? So it's in conversation with other Chileans, and he debunks some myths about her life, but you have to know the myths before you can debunk them, right? So it's very
Mhm.
much in conversation with Chileans, other Chileans, and it presumes a certain amount of knowledge of both Chilean history and Chilean music and culture. And so I tried to write a book that or I think I have written a book that tries to make her accessible to other people who might not be so familiar with Chilean history and how she fits into it, and also people who might not be so know so much about Chilean culture. And then one other thing that I think is my contribution, which is, I think that Chileans also appreciate, is I take a very transnational look at her. So this is a woman who lived in Chile, but she also spent formative years in Paris, as often is the case for artists, right? Many artists, not just from Chile, but throughout Latin America. Many people end up finding themselves in Paris if they're lucky, right? And so
Mhm.
she spent 2 years in Paris in the 50s, and then another three in the 60s, and that also formed her, shaped her as an artist. And so I think I take a look of her, sort of how she fits into the world art scene as much as how she fits into Chilean society. And I think
Mhm.
that actually she really wanted the world to know her work. She didn't want just Chileans to know her work. She stayed in Paris for that long because she wanted to introduce her art and also Chilean art to the larger world. And she was very successful at it. So I think there's that angle to my story as well. And finally, what makes me different, I think, than other books is I'm a historian. So I'm very interested in how, you know, instead of it being like the story of an individual, which of course it is, her genius doesn't, is not like, uh, is not replicable by other people. But people like to say she was out, ahead of her times, or she was sort of magical. And I think of her as very much part of her times and actually shaping her times because I'm a historian, right? So, for example, she's part of a folk group. She goes out and she collects all these songs that are really beautiful folk songs that she collects them from older people because the folk songs are dying, right? Everyone's just listening to the radio and playing records. So she goes and does this important work, but it's in a decade when people are doing this important work all over the world because everyone's sort of feeling that and sensing that. And because it's really a transnational movement, the folk revival of the 1950s is happening in Chile, but it's happening in Argentina and England and the United States. I mean, the parallels would be Woody Guthrie, Alan Lomax, Pete
Hmm.
Seeger, all of these people that are here. And the same thing in the 60s, she starts writing these amazing protest songs that are still sung today. And so is Bob Dylan, right? Her first album of protest songs comes out in 1962, and I think that's when Dylan's first album comes out.
Hmm.
It's really she's part of a transnational movements, that a lot of people are writing protest songs in the 60s, right? So every
Hmm.
country has their Bob Dylan and.
Yeah. But I'm also I play guitar
Ah,
and well, I play ukulele and bass less well, but I play guitar mainly. But I'm interested to know about her instrumentation because I was reading a little bit about it, and it seems like it's some of the instruments she played something called a quattro. I think
yes,
that's how you say it,
yeah.
which is a little bit different than a traditional guitar. Talk a little bit about the instruments she played and kind of Chilean folk music in terms of instrumentation.
Well, so she was really a talented musician. So any instrument that sort of fell in her hands, she would learn. The first instrument she learned was guitar. The story has it she was like 7 or 8. Her father was a great guitarist and singer and a sort of a partier. So he didn't want his kids to be like him, so he locked up his guitar with a key. But supposedly, when she was like 7 or 8, she found the key, unlocked the guitar case, and took out the guitar and sort of leaned it on the ground. But she remembered all of the fingerings from having seen her father play. So she's the first of her siblings to learn how to play guitar, and she's incredibly gifted. So she also played accordion because accordion is used in folk music in Chile, and she learned how to play the harp because someone lent her one, and there suddenly she's at a party and she's playing the harp, right? And those are all used in Chile. And then this is interesting. I mean, I hope it's interesting to people. She goes to Paris, and it's the 1950s, and there's all of these Latin American artists in Paris. So, for example, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's Nobel Prize in Literature, but also your listeners might know because there's a Netflix series right now based on his most famous novel, 100 Years of Solitude. And
Hmm.
so he's there, and to make a living so he can write his novel, he's playing in the same bar as she is. And so there's sort of a Latin American music scene. But what's interesting about it, he's Colombian. There's other Venezuelan musicians. There's Argentine music. It's in Paris that all of this different musical styles from Latin America and different instrumentation kind of come together and become what people now think of as Latin American folk music. Because, for example, just to give the example of the cuatro you mentioned, and it's called cuatro because it has 4 strings, cuatro,
Hmm.
4. It's a Venezuelan instrument. It's a beautiful small guitar that's really almost used. It's like the way it's played is percussive. It's really a fantastic, it's across the way it's strummed. It's almost like you have a percussion instrument in your hands.
Hmm.
And so that's a style of playing and a guitar that comes from Venezuela and Colombia. And suddenly a Chilean's playing it, and she's playing it with a Bolivian who plays the quena, which is a bamboo flute, right? They're mixing up all the instrumentations from across Latin America. And strangely, that probably could only happen in Paris, which at the time Gabriel Garcia Marquez refers to as the capital of Latin America. There's so many artists there trying to make their way, and there's that kind of makes so she brings back some instruments from Latin America via Paris, right? She brings back a cuatro, a Venezuelan cuatro, but she got it in Paris. She's never been to Venezuela,
Hmm.
and other instruments like that. She plays a charango, which is an Andean instrument, which she also learns. Actually, she gets hers in Bolivia, but they're playing it in Paris as well. And it's a beautiful, very bright sounding 10-string guitar, very small. That's why it's so bright. And
Hmm.
it's traditionally made from the back of an armadillo. So you can imagine what the shape looks like a little
Wow.
bit, right? And so there's all these different guitars. She does play them. Her lover, the great love of her life, whose name is Gilbert Favre, and he's Swiss, he plays the quena, this bamboo flute. And I'm trying to think what other instruments I know for a fact. She plays the tambourine, which can be very, percussive as well. It's not just like
Sure.
hitting it with your hand, like clapping it. You can do all sorts of things with a tambourine. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any. She basically any instrument that fell in her hands, she'd play. She
Sure.
could. Yeah.
And you've talked a little bit about this already, but you're a historian, but she's also a historian too, and she is bringing a lot of these songs and sounds and oral traditions back into popular usage when, like you said, they were probably in danger of being lost, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. No, she's one before she sort of has this creative explosion there, which I call her volcanic period, right? Before she becomes this, kind of creative uh, uh, musician, composer, artist. She's devotes many, many years of her life to collecting these songs. And she doesn't hesitate, she'll go off and maybe she'll be say she'll plan to go off for 3 days and end up staying 3 weeks because she finds such interesting material. And also she would ride a horse, she would ride a mule, whatever it took to get to these very remote parts of Chile, to learn the songs and collect them. And before she convinced some university to give her a tape recorder. But before that, she invented her own system of notation to remember the melodies, and she'd learn the melodies and how to play them. So she literally collected thousands of songs, we think, and recorded hundreds of those songs. And so she really did a service to Chilean history and Chilean people by recording these songs and sort of preserving them in that sense, because radio did do a great job, and then came a television. So the songs, people don't learn songs that way anymore, right? They learn songs from records and learn songs from radio, which is very different because you end up trying to imitate what you hear as opposed to it kind of being passed down, and there's lots of different versions, right? The human spirit sort of creates lots of different versions of things, whereas a recording has it's sort of fixed in time and it's always going to be the same, right? So
Right.
it's very different. And so she was truly generous in that way, and um, really, I would say she went to a great expense to do this. Like no one really supported her. There was like some university funded about 6 months of her life, but the rest she was
Hmm.
really doing it on her own. And the kids, her kids remember being pretty hungry at times because she'd be off doing what she thought was more important than sort of working a day job. Let's put it that way.
Right. Now I've never been to South America at all, so I've never been to Chile, but what is Chile like for people like me who have not been?
Oh my God, it's the most beautiful country. So it's a little bit has a very unique shape.
Mhm.
Chile is, I think, one of the maybe with the longest country in the world. It's very, very long, and at its widest point, it's 150 miles.
Wow.
So it's like it feels like anywhere you are, you can see the Andean Mountains, because that's one of the borders is the Andean Mountains and the other is the Pacific Ocean, right? And at
Hmm.
the longest time, it takes 6 hours to cross the country. So, and also it's very easy to travel in Chile, and it was in her time too. Well, because since it's so long, there's like one major highway that connects it all. And in her days, there was also well, there still are trains. You can get anywhere in Chile on trains because they just need one line, right? If it's 150 miles wide, you only need a train going up and down pretty much.
Sure.
And it's always been very connected that way. And it's in terms of since it's so long, it has all of these amazing, just um, very varied geographies. So the top is, the northern part is the Atacama Desert, which is the driest desert in the whole world. But then you go down, you've got these beautiful sort of vineyards and agricultural region that's very, very fertile. Then you go further down, and you have the southern Chile, which is absolutely gorgeous. Mountains. It looks like if you're lucky enough to have been to Switzerland, it sort of looks like these beautiful mountains with these pristine lakes and the snow-capped mountains. And then further south you have Patagonia, right? So the southern tip of the continent. And it's just stunningly beautiful. People are wonderful very generous. And um, writing this book has felt like just such a collective process because project so many Chileans have helped me along the way, answered my questions, shared their knowledge with me, encouraged me. It's really been a beautiful, beautiful process. So I encourage people to go to Chile. I sort of don't want to because I don't want that many people to go, but go. It's really, really wonderful. And then it's just such an interesting. It's got interesting history, people
Mhm.
trying to change the world and make it a better place, and you'll learn about a lot about that too. So that's it's just a great place.
And you've spoken to this already a little bit, but she was pretty politically significant in Chile in terms of you said the Chilean New Song movement. Can you talk a little bit about the political history of Chile and how this cultural shift in the 60s here figures into all that?
Sure, sure. I'd love to. So she was really, they call her the mother of the New Song movement. And the New Song movement in Chile, or Nueva Canción, was a movement of protest songs, in late 60s, early 70s. And she's called the mother because she was really one of the first people to write these songs of her generation. She was actually the mother of other singers, Isabel and Ángel Parra, who are also very well-known singers. And she wrote the most amazing political songs, very powerful ones. I love to give the example of Arriba quemando el sol, with the sun burning above, because I think it has so many elements of the power of her songs. So it's a song about the mining camps in the Atacama Desert, right? So again, minerals are found in the harshest places, right? So it's a mining camp. But what I love about Violeta Parra, and Violeta Parra only writes about what she knows. So it's a mining camp she has visited, right? And so she writes about what she sees. She's like a witness to her country. And she writes about the harsh conditions that the miners live in and work in. But what I love about her, which was unusual for her times, is she also saw women's labor. So she has a verse about the miners' wives, and they're all in a line with their buckets waiting at the only water pump in the whole town, right? So the whole mining camp. So that's part of their labor, is to go and carry water back to their homes every single day, probably multiple times, right? So she sees their labor, and then also she's always in the songs. They're always first person songs. So the last verse says that I went back to Santiago and I said, "Hey guys, what's going on here? How can the conditions be so bad?" So she's really a social witness, and the songs, just the beauty of the poetry and the music, they really have lived on. So there's that. She died before, the new song movement was a very intentional music of leftist musicians who wanted to put their music to as sort of as a tool for political mobilization, right? They wanted their music to be part of their activism. I think you think of the civil rights movement, that would be the music, music accompanied the civil rights movement. It was sort of a motor of the civil rights movement. And so they were feeling that same way in Chile. She died before the movement actually took the name Nueva Canción. They actually were very intentional. She died in 67. They took it in 69. And then there was a 3-year experiment in socialism under the president Salvador Allende, who was a pediatrician. He was the head of a coalition called the Popular Unity Government. And but her music became very important then. People sort of rediscovered her. They discovered her political songs. They really liked her songs. And then comes this brutal, brutal coup. 3 years into Allende's presidency, there's a brutal military coup in Chile. And the musicians are jailed, they're tortured. Victor Jara, who is Chile's Bob Dylan, is killed. So if you think about, you know, Bob Dylan's protest songs, think about um, them being so powerful and the military being so brutal that you get killed for being a
Mhm.
protest singer. That would be Victor Jara. And so he's killed. Violeta Parra's son, Ángel Parra, is put into a concentration camp for 6 months until international campaign gets him out. Her children go into exile, and they become the voice of the Chilean resistance. And Violeta Parra's songs become the symbol of the Chilean resistance. And there's a very, very moving protest that happens within Chile in 1984. So 11 years into this military dictatorship that lasted for 19. And it's a really harsh time. And the people that are organizing for return to democracy, for human rights, they decide as a protest. It's a day of life. Una jornada, a day pro-life, right? It's in favor of life. And they decide that what they're going to do is at noon, everyone's going to stop what they're doing. and they're going to go outside and they're going to sing this song that is a song that gives my book its title, Gracias a la vida, thanks to life. And you know, the song itself has no political content. It's thanks life for for your, you know, your all of your senses, for the words you form, for your hearing, for your feet that carry you throughout the country. Um, and so you can't really arrest someone for singing a song that's beautiful, right? That doesn't have no political content and, you know, strength in numbers. So this is a real sort of political act of resistance, of affirmation of life, and she's right at the center of it, even though she's been dead for almost 2 decades.
Hmm.
And it just goes on like that. Her music still has that kind of power and that kind of sense of hope, and also just a sense of standing up to injustice, because that really was what she did when she was alive.
Right. Well, I definitely could keep asking you questions about this for a very long time, obviously, but it seems like we're getting close to the end of the Zoom here. But what else that I haven't asked you about that, and of course, don't want to give everything away in the book, but if there's anything else we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to know about this book or her work or anything else, that'd be great.
Well, I think that she's a very her life story is really interesting. She was also very rebellious. She had at least she had two husbands, many lovers. She had four children, and she didn't really play by the rules of her time and of, you know, what women were supposed to do. So there's that part that I think is very interesting about her life. And I did want to say, because I'm kind of proud of it, but I have a website. My name is very unusual, so I get to name my website my own name,
Nice.
and it's Ericka Verba. It's spelled Ericka Verba. And I'd like you to visit it anyway, because it tells you more about the book and there's, you know, visuals and all that. But what I'm really proud about or excited about is it has a playlist. So if you go to my website, and if you have Spotify, you can actually, if you're reading the book, you can go through and listen to all the songs that are actually talked about in the book. So it's
Nice.
not so abstract to you. You can actually like hear them, and it's organized. So I'm excited about that too. That sounds, I don't know why, but like to have a playlist that goes with your book just feels kind of exciting
Yeah,
to me.
that's really
And
cool.
yeah, so I mean, I would say I hope I hope I've made your listeners curious to know more about her.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and you know, if you like to kind of curl up at night with a story that's it's detailed, right? This is a, you know, I try to explain her life, so it's not, it's, you know, it's got 10 chapters, you know, it's a book. But if you like to like learn about other people and try and other countries, I think that I think your listeners would enjoy it reading it. I've heard it's not like a, even though like it's published by an academic press, I've been told it's not like an academic book, which I think is
Mhm.
good. We hope it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, thank you for taking all this time. I appreciate it, and I think definitely think people should check out your book for sure. I'm in the middle of reading it now. But the one question I do ask at the end is, what music have you been listening to lately?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's see, I've been like, I've turned my car, I've found out what do you call it? I'm a Luddite when it comes to technology, and I'm very late to realizing that I can get my phone to be the Spotify to be like, um, uh, it plays in my car, so I just turn my car into karaoke. So I'll just take a songwriter whose songs I happen to know because I remember lyrics of songs from when I was younger. Like lately, I've done Bob Dylan, and I'll
Right.
just sing all this. I'll just, you know, go through the whatever Spotify puts on, and I'll just sing all the songs. So I've been having a blast. So I would say Bob Dylan. I have been listening to Bob Dylan, but this is maybe embarrassing. I don't know, but I for some reason know, even though I was too young to really know it, my parents must have had the record, but I know the whole, uh, the musical Hair. So that can
Nice.
really get me to work and back at listen, you know, singing along to the whole musical of Hair.
Well, that's
I
good.
shouldn't be telling you this. This is like these. I'm being honest.
Sure. That's what I
I should have
want.
made up something more like highbrow.
Oh, that's not what that question's about at all. Yeah, this is that we're getting to it. Well, that's great. Did you see the Bob Dylan movie?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
I
I've been
haven't
like,
either.
so I
I
can't
want to.
wait. I really can't wait.
I love Bob Dylan. I'm interested to see. I feel like I can't remember. Did I see the other one? There was you know what I'm talking about? There was another Bob Dylan movie a few years ago where a bunch of different people played him throughout the movie.
That I don't know, but have you ever seen, there's a wonderful, wonderful spoof of that whole time period called The Mighty Wind.
Yes,
It's
I love
very
Pretty
funny.
Woman. Yes, Well, great.
Very good.
Well, I would probably be remiss if we didn't end the episode here. I'll insert it later, but the song that's the namesake of your book here, we'll
Oh,
end
please do.
the episode with that. That'll be a good one. So
Please do. I would really appreciate that. That would be wonderful. Do you
great.
want me to read? I have my book ends with a one verse in translation. Would you like me to read it to you?
Please do.
Okay, so then that would be a perfect, then you can play the music. So the last verse of the song is of Gracias a la Vida says, and so it's a translation here. Thanks to life for all it has given me. It has given me laughter. It has given me tears. And so I distinguish joyfulness from sorrow, the materials that together make up my song and your song, which is the same song, and everyone's song, which is my own song.
Beautiful. Well, great. Well, thank you again, and yeah, come back anytime. Definitely
Well,
talk more. So
thank you so much for having me on and for your interest, and I just really appreciate it. Thank you
great.
again.
Well,
All right.
have a good night. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.